I recently watched a pretty good video by Arbiter Ian. In the video, Ian talks about one of the most important problems facing the Warhammer community today, a toxic fandom spiral. It's a great video and I think you should check it out. The main takeaway is that we, as a Warhammer community, have created a bunch of toxic fandom incentives. And these incentives encourage people to conflate their consumption of Warhammer with their identity. As Ian points out, it's not good for the community, but it's also not really good for the people. They're trapped in a vicious hate cycle, where their biases are reinforced for profit, and that can turn them into hateful, narrow-minded people. So, apropos of nothing, let's talk about Shadiversity. Murder on the Orient Express is one of Agatha Christie's most popular stories, and it's one that's always captured my imagination. It's a great example of how to tell a compelling mystery story in a tightly confined space. The plot untangles a bit like a spiderweb, and Hercule Poirot is trapped in the middle of it. But because he's Poirot, he's able to untangle the web by the end of the story. Or is he? I think one of the most memorable parts of this story is that Poirot is forced to confront his own morality when he uncovers the conspiracy within the conspiracy, which is ultimately what the story is all about. The twist is that while Poirot uncovers the conspiracy, well, nothing you see gets past his egg-shaped head, he covers it up to the police by presenting a second compelling theory because he wants to preserve a greater justice. He was forced to look inside of himself and realize that sometimes the truth and justice diverge. Our subject of today's video is going to be Shadiversity. He's a subject that I find endlessly compelling. But it's also going to be a story of two different narratives. By the end of the video, you can decide for yourself which one is more plausible. So for those of you who don't know, Shadiversity is a YouTuber of some size, with almost 1.7 million subscribers. He's been a subject of this channel before, and I suspect I'll still find ways to talk about him in the future. You see, Shad makes videos about swords, when he's not making videos complaining about women wearing pants. I find him fascinating as a subject because he's simultaneously somebody who takes fantasy stories really seriously, but also someone who's a member of a fundamentalist Christian cult, aka Mormonism. Here is someone who sincerely believes in the Christian fan fiction of Joseph Smith, but also finds himself stretched to credulity about whether or not a woman could beat up a man in a superhero movie. I don't like a lot of the Marvel movies either, I'm not coming out to bat to defend them, but I don't make complaining about them my entire personality. My point is, Shad has a lot of opinions about culture, media, history, martial arts, and all of their many intersections. It's fascinating. He's built a YouTube career out of talking about them. In fact, he was probably one of the first to do so. But if you've seen his recent video, that career is not going so well. He's made yet another video about how YouTube is killing his channel. I think it's worthwhile to investigate these claims made by him because, in a way, I think these type of videos give you a real insight into the kind of person Shad actually is. You can tell that he's serious because he's not wearing his patented Shadiversity gambeson. So I've watched this video a few times, and I think I'd like to interrogate some of his points to see if I can find some problems. Like last time, I'll include a link to his video so you can be sure that I'm not taking him out of context or anything. So, in his video, Shadiversity basically states the plain reality of his channel. His main channel, Shadiversity, since this guy has a bunch of channels, is dying.
You might have heard that YouTube channels have a life cycle, and although that's not applicable to every content creator, it is to some, and it seems like Shadiversity might be reaching its end. Shadiversity, the channel, is dying, and it's not for the quality of content. I genuinely believe, and the feedback certainly is to this effect, that we've been making some of the best content we ever have. And hundreds of thousands of people have been interested and are still in, or would be, and want to watch if they had actually been getting recommended the content. There's been people reaching out to me saying that they thought I had stopped uploading. But no, we've been releasing content as normal, they just stopped getting recommended it, and I'll show the evidence of what's going on.
Essence of the problem is that his channel isn't profitable to make. He is making less from the channel than what it costs to produce. So at some point, it's going to mean that the channel itself will have to cease to be, because he simply cannot afford to produce videos anymore. I think I can empathize with this struggle. After all, this channel isn't remotely profitable. I work basically 2 jobs outside of YouTube, and very occasionally I get a small check from YouTube that I share with my delightful co-host, Callum, whose awesome magic videos you can watch here. Shad's reality is the reality facing pretty much most of YouTube. I've said it before and I'll say it again, YouTube is a very top-heavy platform. A small percentage of the content creators take away most of the money generated on the platform. Being on YouTube is in essence like running your own small business, but on land owned by Amazon. We all live in the shadow of a looming corporate supergiant, and whose steps leave devastation in its wake. Shad's central thesis of his video is this: YouTube is killing his channel by not showing his content to enough viewers. He goes into a bunch of supporting points about this idea, but he never steps away from this central thesis. YouTube is killing his channel, and this is, of course, a first theory. It's a narrative that Shad has maintained ever since he started to complain about YouTube. It's a compelling story, but is it true? Well, let's talk about it. The first point is looking at the reasons why the views are down. The thing about YouTube is, we're dealing with a black box full of uncertainty. YouTube has never, and will never, ever fully explain how it is that their content recommendation system works. If they did, you can bet that it would be immediately gamed by a billion content moles trying to make as much money as possible. So obfuscation is, in a sense, their only route. But in the absence of clarity, mystical thinking has taken over. For example,
basically, no subscribers means no new viewers. No new viewers means the channel will only die. Person who subscribed can't subscribe again, and they're not going to rewatch content. And here's the thing. Recommendations, impressions, right? Lowest they've been are in over 5 years. But recommendations are supposed to be determined by click-through rate. Okay?
That's an interesting claim. Does Shad provide any source for this? No, unfortunately not. Click-through rates are not inherently tied to recommendations. What a click-through rate tells you is just the rate of conversion from an impression to watching a video, i.e., from a registered source, like a YouTube search feature, what is the rate of people who were given your thumbnail to see and then clicked on that video based on that. Shad's making a categorical assumption error here. Just because somebody clicked through your video doesn't actually mean that they watched it or would want to watch it. Click-through rate is primarily about the thumbnail. Yes, that's a vital component of your video for sure, but it doesn't necessarily mean that if you have a high click-through rate, your video is going to get a lot of views. And it's not the only factor, of course, that determines the value of the video. Speaking of value, I find it interesting that Shad didn't talk much about watch time. YouTube is not in the business of serving videos. YouTube is actually in the business of serving ads to people watching videos. It stands to reason that even though we can't quantify it exactly, watch time is also something that we might want to use when assessing a video. Shad doesn't tell us or quantify how well his videos are doing in terms of watch time, i.e., are people actually watching his videos? The thing is, Shad makes long-form content, at least 20-minute episodes. The thing that Shad's fixed on is the number of eyeballs he's getting on his content. But conveniently, he's not thinking about how long those eyeballs are actually staying there. YouTube wants videos with a wide reach, for sure, but it also wants videos that it knows can be reliable to serve ads on, that people are going to be watching. The thing is, Shad is right about one thing. YouTube has control of who gets views. That's undeniable. YouTube has a content recommendation algorithm that they have tuned that ultimately decides who gets views or not. There's a finite number of people with a finite number of time to watch YouTube, and even though the platform is growing, this is still a fundamental fact. So of course, YouTube controls who gets eyeballs, but they can't actually make you watch a video. Absenting issues like adblock for a second, YouTube can't actually force somebody to watch a video. So that leaves us with a seemingly obvious truism. People watch videos that they want to watch. If they're not watching your video, then perhaps, maybe, they're fundamentally not interested in it. It almost seems like Shad feels like he's entitled to views.
Is it because there is just more content on the platform? More videos means less views between them? I actually think shorts have been devastating for both YouTube and content creators like me. But also, there are more users on the channel than ever before, like I've mentioned, and so it isn't like there is less views to go around. There's more people here to watch content. And I also get the feeling that Mr. Beast could survive with, say, perhaps half the amount of impressions or views he gets, and some of those impressions could be given to other content creators. Now, it's nothing against Mr. Beast, okay, but YouTube definitely has a preference to certain creators that it favors and boosts unfairly. YouTube is on record saying this, by the way. They're on record saying that they prioritize authoritative sources and they curate the trending page and recommendations.
I know we all work hard on our videos. It hurts. It really hurts when you put a lot of effort into something and it just doesn't seem to get that much traction. It's almost as if the quality of the video feels like it's correlated to the number of views that it gets. But that's not necessarily true. It's just something that you have to make your peace with as a content creator, especially if you're trying to make a living out of it. YouTube doesn't owe anyone anything, actually. That's the point. Despite what Shad thinks about YouTube, they are a company that wants to make money. Preferably as much as possible. They will not necessarily leave money off the table if they think they can get it. And of course, we saw how they reacted with the Sniper Wolf reaction scandal. They will definitely keep people on if those people make them money. So if your videos are getting people to watch, it's almost guaranteed that YouTube will find an audience for you, because it makes them money to do so. I've spoken before about how the only real way to fix this situation with YouTube is of course to go beyond the market, to turn YouTube into something other than a for-profit company. As it stands, YouTube is the best option for people trying to make a living as a content creator, and Shad admits so himself.
Suffer a similar drop on other platforms like TikTok, Facebook, Odyssey, BitChute, and Rumble. And by the way, when we started uploading on TikTok, our content exploded. We have over 100,000 subscribers on there over a very short period of time. It grew crazy fast with millions of views, but overall, no real growth on the platforms that matter in terms of getting higher ad revenue, because you don't make money on TikTok, and there was really no point in sacrificing the man hours to keep pushing on that when we're suffering on the main area that we need to focus on. Having said that, though, we do try and mirror our content on other platforms. YouTube broke mirroring on Rumble specifically, and so we haven't been able to put our content on that, but we're making active changes to now manually upload on Rumble as well. But the issue is that currently there is no viable, sustainable alternative to YouTube. We don't make money on any of these other platforms.
But something tells me that Shad wouldn't really be interested in listening to my proposal to unprivatize YouTube, since, he's a conservative, and they only love the free market until it turns against them. I think YouTube has plenty of problems. I've spoken about them many times. I just don't think Shad would be amenable to any solutions to those problems. The reality of the matter is, using Shad's logic, his own personal beliefs, YouTube's a private company. They're allowed to behave as they want, because it's their business. You either play by their rules, or you pack up and you go. I really would like to know what Shad thinks should be done about this, because again, by his own admission, there are no other competitors to YouTube. The company is too big, and no company can actually offer you an actual career out of making YouTube. It's almost like the free market is having a bit of a failure, but I digress. So that's our first theory. But I do have another one. To start, we'll have to look at a bit of history. Shadiversity's YouTube account started in 2013, which was 11 years ago, but the oldest video on his channel is Why Swords Are Awesome, from 9 years ago. This first video has 40,000 views, nothing to sneeze at certainly, but it didn't necessarily immediately launch his channel to success. It's a full 2 years before Shad is even able to get 10,000 subscribers. The thing is, YouTube has really changed. I think it's difficult for anybody to understand how the history of YouTube has evolved, especially in an era where digital preservation is generally poor and memories are even worse. But 10 years ago, the YouTube space was really different. 10 years ago, some of the biggest channels in the sword community were either somewhat unknown or just getting started. Matt Easton of Schola Gladiatoria uploaded his first video 10 years ago. Scalagram was making YouTube videos 14 years ago. A lot of these videos are rough, especially by today's standards of production, but this is not a reflection of their quality, merely their time. All the videos were rough back then. The idea of being a professional content creator online wasn't really a thing yet. What we're looking at when we're looking at these people are amateur hobbyists making videos about things that they care about, sharing opinions and information that they feel very strongly about. My point is, when Shad started making videos, YouTube was a fundamentally amateur platform, and the space didn't really have much in the way of people making content for a living. So it's not a surprise then that some of the earliest content creators to move towards making sword content are also some of the biggest today. They benefited from being the first in the space. Not everyone made it, however. There were, as there are now, many small channels that either never became large enough to become noticeable or faded away with time for various reasons. YouTube's always been mercurial and difficult in that way. But Shad did make it. Of all the people making sword content, he has one of the largest channels by far. But you'll notice that these other guys aren't super massive. Skalagram has almost as many subs as Shad, but he still doesn't pull the same number of views that Shad can. Despite, in my opinion, being an infinitely better channel, Scala Gladiatoria doesn't even have 500,000 subscribers. In his video, Shad talked about how big channels can become victims of their own success. And I think he's right, but I don't think he sees the full picture. You see, I think a better explanation is that Shad lived in a bubble. When Shad started making videos on YouTube, the site wasn't as what it is now. Sword content and the Sword community didn't really exist yet, or was in its infancy. Within a few years, there started to be some traction for these communities, both because of real-world things, like better humor community organization, but also because a few of the people making Sword content started to actually get traction. They were the first people to help really create the bubble, and thus they were the ones most likely to benefit from it. But of course, they didn't benefit equally. And this allowed them, these initial group of creators, to ride that bubble as the Sword community developed into what it is today. But the thing about bubbles is that they burst. Completely regardless of what YouTube has done, no bubble lasts forever. And it's not 2014 anymore. Today, the Sword community has far many more options for content. There's a lot more creators who are fighting for the same pool of views. Regardless of the fact that the entire YouTube consumer base is growing, we're still talking about a niche hobby and an interest group. Not everybody in that new pool of people is going to be interested in Sword content. That's fine. YouTube is a platform for everybody and pretty much anything, provided it's legal, of course. So, the bubble burst, in my opinion, or is in the process of bursting, and Shad is finding out the hard way. Because when the YouTube bubble was rising, Shad was able to build a massive channel. He could start to make YouTube his actual job, not just a hobby. When the times were good, all of this was fine. He could pay people, he could build a staff, etc., etc. But now, the bubble has burst. When people are looking for Sword content, they're much more spoiled for choice by the many, many creators that exist now. And the thing is, I think Shad is right about his content. The videos he produces are much better quality than the earlier videos that he's done. I mean, that's patently obvious. But the problem is that his videos haven't evolved. They're still fundamentally the same kind of videos that he's always been making. And you can get away with that sort of thing when you're one of the only few names in town, but you can't get away with that today. Shad makes another point about the negative effect that he thinks YouTube Shorts is having on his channel. The thing is, I don't really agree with Shad. I don't like the trend of all social media becoming like all others. Just recently, TikTok announced that they were going to add photos to their platform, probably to compete with things like Instagram. Because of the financial incentives, all of social media is turning into a grey slurry. That's not good. But Shad admitted that the people who were watching the shorts weren't actually interested in watching his content. Why? Because I bet they were primarily interested in shorts from people like Robin Swords and other people. If you don't know who Robin Swords is, he's a sword YouTuber who has quite a large selection of shorts content. I would argue that he probably got the success of his channel based on the quality of his shorts content. But think about this. Why even count the people who watch your short content if they're not actually interested in watching your long-form content? Shad is arguing that those people shouldn't be allowed to have their YouTube shorts because it interferes with his ability to make his long-form content. That he tried to appeal to them and it didn't work because they didn't watch his long-form content. Therefore, there's some fundamental problem with the entire system. Yeah, I think there are problems with YouTube shorts, but if the people who don't watch your shorts might watch your long-form content and vice versa, then surely that's just an issue with your content, right? It's not necessarily that anybody who's interested in watching shorts would be interested in watching a longer video. Of course, we can talk about issues, relating to society, but again, Shad's conservative. I don't really think he believes in a society. There's no grand conspiracy here by YouTube. They just want to make money. And the people who are primarily interested in shorts content aren't that interested in his long-form content. If you really want to make it as a professional sword content creator these days, you have to stand out from the crowd. In the old days, people didn't have that many options. And you could thrive because if you watch sword content, there's a good chance that that person watched almost all of the other sword creators. Things were different then. Shad lived in a niche, and that niche didn't last forever. On YouTube, you can either appeal to that niche, or you can try to appeal to everyone. Shad chose a broad, entry-level approach, and that worked well when there weren't many creators offering the same thing. The success of his channel allowed more people to dive into the space, and it became more professionalized and diverse. And now, the competition is a lot more fierce. Some creators didn't adapt to the circumstances. Others, like Shad, are supposedly in the process of dying. This has all happened before. Don't believe me? Look at the Warhammer 40k creator space on YouTube. Years ago, it started with a few small channels, mostly doing lore reads. Nowadays, way more channels with a lot more content. Some creators can't pull in the views that they used to, while others are pivoting to high-quality niche content that you wouldn't find anywhere else. That's the reality of YouTube, and sword YouTube especially. Matt Easton, for example, is a great presenter, but he also brings extremely valuable and extremely rare expertise on historical arms and armor. Todd, of Todd's Workshop, is a genuine master craftsman. Newer channels like Sellsword Arts combine the kinds of nerdy interest in sword with, of course, genuine skill and practice. And, not to speak more positively of Robin's swords, but he combines great presentation with genuine expertise in a very digestible manner. Of course he's successful. If you want sword content, you're going to find it, and you're going to find people who have a lot more expertise than Shad does. By his own admission, he's not a professional historian. He's not a trained martial artist. He doesn't have access to a lot of historical arms and armor or anything like that. He's an amateur in everything but being a professional YouTuber. So yes, while this content has improved, it hasn't evolved with the changing times and circumstances. Shad has remained the same. He's the same fundamental person that he always was. Closed off, narrow-minded, and unintrospective. He's super quick to blame the boogeyman of YouTube, but I think it's much more likely that when the times were good, Shad lived in a delusional bubble that the times would remain that way. He expanded his operation into something that could not actually be sustained, and the bubble has burst, and now he's feeling the consequences. Instead of meaningfully evolving, meaningfully looking inside himself, and trying to evolve with himself and his content, he's just been content to sit on a throne that he won in times of peace, unaware that he would not survive that throne in times of war. So there you have it. I have laid out 2 theories for why I believe Shadiversity's channel is dying. You have his own theories, which I believe are built on shaky ground, and you have my theory, which I think makes a lot more sense. I've left out talking about Shad's more openly conservative views, because while I think those are definitely a problem, I don't necessarily think that that's the only issue. Shad is not the only content creator to have had his channel die. I personally think that his conservatism is a reason why people have turned away from him. I think it makes him an unpleasant person, and it definitely makes him more unpleasant to more people than it endears him to. He has now what I would think is a core audience, and I think that core audience actually reflects the truer size of the actual audience that his kind of content is capable of fostering. I think Shad is in this mess because he's unintrospective. He's had, at least a decade of time, most of that inside that bubble, to develop himself beyond what he started off as. But he hasn't. Instead, he's doubled down on it. I suspect that as things get worse, he might try and pivot towards more conservatism. I think conservatives are the kinds of people that must make up his audience, because Shad delusionally believes that people can really separate his sword opinions from his bigoted conservative ones. You can't just believe heinous things on one channel, using your name and face, mind you, and then expect people not to find it offensive and taint their perception of you for the rest of your content. I think it's an impossible standard, one that I don't think Shad himself is capable of holding to. If someone that he likes, for example, say came out as trans, I don't think he would actually be able to continue to support them in the way that he expects to be supported for being a conservative. Now, if you want to make the content that you want, I think you should be free to. I make the content I want. But I have to be prepared to deal with the consequences. I'm probably not going to be able to make a lot of money from YouTube, and that's okay. I think Shad is ultimately entitled. I think he feels entitled to success, despite not realizing how his own failings are holding him back. His brother Jazza is arguably a lot more successful at this YouTube game, but you never really see him whining at YouTube. He's had to change himself to adapt to new conditions, and you can see that outcome, that process of introspection, which I think is fundamentally necessary if you want to be an artist, has ultimately rewarded him with success. The content that he makes now is different to the content that he made then. He's tried to have new things. He's tried to evolve and adapt himself. Introspection is difficult. It's difficult to look inside yourself and be honest about your flaws and your failings. I know that. But Shad refuses to do any of this. He keeps insisting his stuff is as good as it is, and that it's YouTube who's to blame for his channel to fail. That doesn't, of course, surprise me, because he's a conservative. That kind of false victimhood is exactly what their entire movement is built upon. Shad has had more than a decade to actually foundationally build something that was sustainable. I think that when the times are good, he just built out as recklessly as he could have, not realizing that the times would never be good forever. And now he's stuck here, facing a difficult decision where he can't really exactly change his channel, because now it's a bit too late for that. But also, he kind of just wants to keep doing what he's doing. And yeah, that's it. To reiterate my previous point, Shad won a throne in times of peace, and now in times of war, he finds that he cannot keep it. Thanks to everybody who watched this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think about Shad and his downfall. I actually feel like Robert Baratheon were handed the throne after the rebellion, but didn't actually fight for it. That, I think, would be a great representation of Shad. Shout out to the Patreons, Discordance, Liam Anderson, and Dorian. Check out our socials and stuff. Like and subscribe, you know the drill. Until next time, cheers.